talking about that the lesson plan was mostly about preparing scholars for their Socratic seminar, their debate, looking into they were working on their assigned body system and their research. They were guided through the research process and in terms of like, you know, what articles to use, what websites, accredited websites to use and all of that. And I would say, again, when we look back at the video, we're looking at the classroom expectations and routine. This is, again, that's a big thing. It's every class, they know what they need to do when they come in, having the timer to keep on track with everything, with the activities, with the transition as well.
Yeah, I think you were able to see maybe the routine a little bit better from like where we put the camera in this class. So I think that was something that the overall video I think improved just by moving the camera to a new location.
And it showed the whole class, so we were like able to see.
And you could see like the clock, you could see like a lot of those things that you might not have been able to see in the other videos. And you could also, I think you could hear a lot better in this video than in the previous ones too.
Yeah, that was the perfect position,
which was nice.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and then again, they started with the do now, their warm up. They were given the time to work on it, then having the whole class discussion after that. Again, looking in terms of the standards that we have about the content knowledge. Again, that time after the do now, when we have the whole classroom discussion, how do you use, that kind of, the content knowledge, the science knowledge, and lead the discussion, and then ask the scholars to, ask them questions, open-ended questions, to elaborate more. This is how we keep the discussion on.
Yeah, and getting them to use the language verbally. I think I think I'm getting better at that, and I think in this class I think it was like Basel, like he said like one word for one of the answers, and I was able to kind of get him speaking, referencing the text, and using some of that like scientific language before moving on. So I think like just for me in teaching, like that's been something where I'm getting better at like hearing the answers and starting to sit in the moment as opposed to just thinking about what I'm doing next and like moving it on to the next person. And I think that happened again. I was thinking that we were okay with the questions, and I was trying to transition to the next activity, and then I think it was like Mahmoud or somebody had wanted to go over question 4, which I should have probably anticipated that was one that they'd want to go over, because it was one that wasn't super clear as far as like the answer wasn't necessarily right in the text. It wasn't necessarily like a comprehension question as much as like more of an open-ended where they should connect it. And I think that's what we were hoping to see, is that they'd make that connection. So it was good that we reviewed that before moving on to the next activity. I think.
And also looking at the again, as we said, like you mentioned about how we want to adapt our lessons or like our resources that we use in class to to address all the scholars. So talking about how we could use like different versions of the warm up or the do now. We do have a scholar like Brantley, like in terms of reading comprehension and all of that. So he would benefit from having like kind of multiple choice questions with less choices rather than having open-ended questions just to guide him through that.
And maybe tiering the article itself to a lower reading level.
Of the so that's why when it comes like looking for resources as teachers, like what we could use to do that, like to change the level of the text, like to help to adapt.
I think going into the case study like recently was kind of eye-opening for me. I was aware of some of our scholars and some of the hurdles they're trying to work through, but seeing and kind of thinking about adapting some of these materials and how maybe some of the content is missing them. I think it's nice to see the conversations and come up with these ideas to start putting into the class and see. I'll be excited to see results.
The other thing also looking at, as we said, like this is also the right time to correct any kind of misconception during this whole classroom discussion. then they were asked to move on and to start working on their, like, again, they had to do the presentation about their assigned body system as a group, and then to prepare, let's say, the debate document, thinking about their argument statement, and then, you know, preparing their questions that they could ask to the other group, preparing their, let's say, their main points about their system, how they're gonna answer that. So it's really like just looking at the, you know, the steps for their debate, just to prepare them for the next, it wasn't the next class, but the class after for the debate.
Yeah.
So I mean, during the lesson, you felt that they needed a little bit more time in terms of finalizing their debate document, finalizing their presentation as well. So
yeah, and I mean, I think they were working diligently and working hard on, you know, tying what they've done for their project and relating that to their debate. But I think they just needed, you know, more time to button up their projects, which kind of kicked back them actually getting, you know, a lot of real results on their debate. So I think, you know, that's where I was kind of like, the quizzes didn't seem as important to like fit into the lesson.
Yes.
And it was becoming more obvious that like the lesson itself would probably extend into another 50-minute lesson, depending on, you know, what, if we had a long class next or a short one.
Yes.
So, and I think that's kind of how it ended up playing out. It's like they needed that more time, and but it was nice to check in with the groups individually, where you can
the feedback
help
was
lead
like
their
individual feedback. Yeah. I mean, even like, you know, walking with all the groups through their debate document, their presentation, and they wanted that feedback. So like, you know, and again, sometimes it's just like you want that group to work on something, and then you will check on them later on. So like using that kind of like sticky notes, just like, you know, quick notes for that group, and just post it on their table.
And you could see that they were having difficulty, like they were finding good articles, but kind of difficulty digesting them and like actually relating it to the content that we do in class. So asking those questions, getting them to talk about, you know, how the circulatory system, you know, works with the digestive system, to where they could say out loud like what we've been working through, and like kind of then realize like what the connection is to like the actual article they happen to be finding on the internet.
Exactly.
So they know it. It's just like you struggle. You read the content and you're kind of like, you know, it just goes over your head. Like I've been there too. So, so it's nice to get to observe you do some of that, and then, you know, realize how effective, you know, I could be doing similar things, like asking the right questions. And then, more often than not, end up kind of like giving them some silent feedback on some notes, like, because they're eager to know, like, is this what I should put? Is this what I should do? And it's hard not to just give them the answer, but you know, ask them questions instead.
Exactly, that's the thing. I mean, they ask them a question, like exactly just walking them through that process of asking questions, getting the answers.
Kind of tying it back to like those three main points, like, you know, okay, what's the organ, what's the function, you know, and what's the metabolic process.
Metabolic process for that. And then looking at, again, in the standard, it says using instructional resources, technology appropriate for scholars. So when we talk about, let's say, science for a grade 7, again, we're doing integrated science. So what kind of resource we use, we call it like open science ed. So you got the access to that. So just kind of like looking at how our lessons, how our units are being planned, in terms of we start with like you know, a phenomena, or let's say essential question for that unit, and then we walk it through kind of like investigation. This is how we learn in science.
That resource has been like amazing for me to get into and kind of start to realize, like, you know, how helpful it is in the lesson planning, and and then you can kind of take it and adjust it for class. And I think that's been super helpful to know. So I'm like really glad that you gave that to me at the start of the year.
I'm looking at kind of like addressing real world problems. Again, we've been walking through a medical case, again, a specific disease, celiac disease, how it's affecting the body systems, and again, talking about the metabolic functions for these systems, how it's being affected by these diseases or other diseases, and how they can find solutions for that. So it is like, it was research based, but as well as they're using their, you know, their knowledge, their understanding, what we've been learning, and again providing evidence, explaining that. So it is like a, you know, kind of like higher, you know, thinking levels and for that.
Yeah, and I think it it might not have been super evident in the film
in the
itself,
video,
but like when you look at the lesson plan, then you can see like that's a part of it, and you know that they're making those connections to where, you know, thinking more about like, okay, this is the body system and how it works, but it's going beyond that and thinking about how certain diseases would affect, you know, their body system that they're researching. And then I think they had the you know, the part where they're interviewing, right? Interviewing you know, someone in their community that they might know, to where they can kind of ask them questions about how they use this knowledge.
Yeah, we were talking about the last standard here, talking about like understanding different cultures, background of diverse populations. So they were like, you know, taking lead of like, oh, I have the soccer coach for that.
Exactly,
I want to interview my soccer. So like, here we go. So they would kind of like do it outside the school hours, and it's not showing in the video, but again, they're working on that.
But it was there, and I think that was important too, because it gave students like some choice and like what direction they want to head, as far as who they could interview, or you know, how they could go about doing that. Like they're trying to show some independence and some, you know, hopefully choose something that they would be excited about.
Yeah, I would say like looking more into like kind of like giving them like questions, like sample just what they could ask. That was really like helpful. So this is one thing like could be done, like you know, sample of the questions that they could ask. Again, just guide them through like, okay, if you want to ask someone outside the school, like we're talking about, like you can email, you know, the people, just asking what time is suitable, like, you know, just walking them through, like it's not you're gonna just show up and ask questions. It's just we need to plan for that. Some more guidance, I think, in how to go about doing that, and maybe an example, like like I have a family member that had, you know, this issue, and I was able, you know, that'd be a good example for me, but like, you know, you can maybe provide some of those examples would have been better. And that would have been something that I could show in the film. It's kind of giving them those examples. Or again, as we said, like posted the stuff on Google Classroom and just let them know, here are the sample questions you could use. This is the way, and show them like this is how we could email, you know, people from outside the school. Like, you know, you're not emailing your friends. So kind of samples would be helpful.
I think so.
Again, the lesson went really well. I know that the part that we discussed before about the movement. I know again it depends on the lesson, but like looking into more kind of like how we could you know,
I think I could have maybe had them not sit with their groups right away, so that maybe they're interacting, you know, a little bit with other students at the start, and then have them move to their partners later on. Would have been one way to get that in. And I know I've done this in like a class sense, is like just leading them through a quick stretch break. Like I like that because I enjoy it, but it's also like, then they're not just running around. It's like I can just take them through something, and I think they could also like grab a partner and like, you know, use them to balance and like stretch their legs real quick, or like something to where it's like, you know, a little, I don't know. These 7th grade boys like to touch each other, so you know, maybe they can they can grab a partner, and you know,
the video was recorded in the short block somehow, so like 15 minutes,
which is tough.
Which is tough.
But a 2-minute stretch break, I think I can use that as like and the more I do it, the easier it'll be. So like, I can use it as a very quick transition and have it be a part of the transition into their activity, just like every time I teach now. I think so.
You're right. Thank you.
We're getting better.
Thank you.
We're improving.
Thank you.